In times to come, people will write not just PhD theses, not just books, but whole courses in schools and universities will study just the extraordinary ease with which the establishment in your country and mine managed to wheel the best part of a whole population, first on the virus that dare not speak its name for fear of algorithmic interference in this broadcast and its audience, with the entire focus of the mass media on a virus and a prescription as to how to deal with that virus. How the page was turned so comprehensively that no one talked about the virus anymore, because everyone had moved on to the next thing. The next thing was the Ukraine. Do you remember all the lights, blue and yellow? You remember the corner flags at football matches, blue and yellow? You remember the vigils and all the paraphernalia of collection, the state propaganda on a hitherto unforeseen level behind a narrative about a conflict in which far, far away 2 other countries were locked in combat. Everyone had to worship at the altar of the Ukraine and of President Zelensky. The ease with which it was done was simply awesome for someone like me, long experienced in political communications, and the difficult task of pushing boulders uphill for almost all of my life on almost everything that I have fought for and believed in. The tremendous choreography of it all was dispassionately something to wonder at. And then, how quickly that page too was turned. Zelensky became a forgotten man, the Ukraine a forgotten conflict, as 4 weeks ago only, the entire world was turned to face the issue of Gaza, the Palestinians, and the state of Israel. Another foreign country, another clash between foreigners in 2 foreign countries, Palestine and Israel, suddenly became not just an article of faith for the faithful, but became an existential issue for Western countries, just as the Ukraine had earlier been painted as one, as the virus in turn had been painted as one. Now it is existential for us to strain every might and main, to give every dollar we can, send every weapon we have left, and now send our own service personnel into harm's way in the Eastern Mediterranean, and indeed in the case of the US Delta Force, at least literally into the fighting in Gaza. And it's said that there's a D notice on the British media asking them not to mention the fact that British Special Forces, it's been said the SAS, are actually fighting in Gaza. How did all of this happen? And happen with such ease and such overwhelming propaganda power? As someone who has been fighting the Palestinian corner for more than 50 years of my life, again, I have to take my hat off at the skill with which the British establishment has convinced a big section of the British population that a group of people who, in the lifetime of many of you watching this show now, not ancient history, murdered British soldiers, hanging them by piano wire in the orange groves of Jaffa, blowing them to pieces in the King David Hotel, almost 100 of them, in one single terrorist attack. How a group of people who tried multiple times to murder Winston Churchill when he was fighting Adolf Hitler, who tried to blow up Parliament and came closer than Guy Fawkes was able to do, who tried to blow up the Foreign Office and were stymied only by the sharp eyes of a Spitfire pilot from the Royal Air Force who spotted the threat. A group of people who murdered in cold blood on the street the special envoy of the United Nations, Count Bernadotte of Sweden. A group of people who murdered a man from the House of Lords, Lord Moyne. A group of people, the Jabotinsky, Begin, Shamir, Netanyahu gang, that you would have thought would have been anathema to the British establishment, British political public opinion. By the way, you know that the royal family never once went to Israel until just a few years ago when the dotish, now King Charles, actually visited the King David Hotel, where all those British people had been slaughtered by the political movement now in power in the state of Israel. You'd think it would be a tough ask to persuade British people that this was the gang of killers that we needed to get behind. But it appears to have worked. You get sacked from your job for tweeting support for a ceasefire. The BBC, Joe Coburn, tells you that the whole of the Jewish community in Britain is made anxious and fearful by people in a railway station in London demanding a ceasefire in a murderous, genocidal frenzy of violence. She forgot to mention that actually almost all the people in the railway station protesting for a ceasefire were themselves Jewish. The BBC gets to speak for Jewish people, you see. And the thousands of Jews in Britain and America denouncing Netanyahu and this murder spree are not allowed to speak at all. They are airbrushed from the picture. The British Home Secretary, that's the Minister of the Interior, very powerful minister in Britain, a woman called Suella Braverman, tells us with no hint of conflict of interest that her husband is an ardent Zionist and close family members of her are fighting now in Gaza with the Israel Defense Force. She maybe should have said so when she declared it a crime to wear or wave a Palestinian flag on the streets of London. Maybe she should have said that somebody else should have announced that henceforth wearing a keffiyeh, as hundreds of thousands of young people do in the United Kingdom, could now get you arrested as some kind of manifestation of hate. Now, that's a measure of how the British state, its broadcaster, every single one of its newspapers, especially the rancid rag called The Guardian, that once built an audience on its sensibility to the Palestinian feelings, Palestinian suffering, Palestinian history, has now wheeled and turned and is now firmly in the Netanyahu camp like every other British newspaper. It's quite a performance. If you're a recording artist, you'll be cancelled if you breathe a word of sympathy for the Palestinian people, who are, as I speak, on the receiving end of a genocidal mass murder of a kind not seen since the Second World War, not seen since the uprising of the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto who decided that they could no longer breathe under this Nazi persecution, murder, hunger, thirst, and with no medicine or medical care to take care of them when they fell. The Jews decided that because they could not breathe, they must revolt, and wrote their name into history as the bravest, most magnificent humans, mensch, who would rather die on their feet than to live on their knees. The same thing happened in Treblinka. Same thing happened in Auschwitz. Jewish heroes who could not breathe chose instead to revolt. That's what the Palestinians did on October the 7th. They're fighters, not ISIS, but in the words of the Financial Times, more Vietcong than ISIS. Broke out of their concentration camp, revolted because they could not breathe. And now 10,000 Palestinians lay slaughtered on the bitter earth of the Gaza Strip, 25 square kilometers. More explosive power has been dropped on them in 4 weeks than was dropped on Hiroshima in the nuclear attack in August of 1945. The only difference being Hiroshima was 10 times bigger. And you could, if you were quick enough, actually run away from Hiroshima, from Gaza. There is no escape. A Hiroshima has been dropped on a land where more than half of the people are children. Half of the people are women. Half of the people are children. And nearly 70% of those who have been slaughtered have been women and children. Sometimes a 2-for-1. If you murder a pregnant woman and they have to cut the fetus from the dead mother, most likely you'll have got 2 for the price of 1. The digital spokesman of Benjamin Netanyahu published online a picture of a row of dead babies. And the words that he spoke should chill your blood. We have done the world a service, he said, in destroying these little ticking time bombs who would have grown up to be a threat to the whole world. That's the spokesman of the Israeli Prime Minister. If you go beneath to the TikTokers and the common man and woman, 83% of whom are in full support of the complete extermination of the Palestinian population in Gaza. God bless the 17% who are not. If you go underneath the stones, the rocks, and see the racist, genocidal filth which oozes, trust me, I look at it so you don't have to. Because you'll lose your faith in the human race. That, I promise you, if you dig as deep as I have been digging this last few weeks. Anyway, it's about to take a very dramatic turn. Following the double genocidal attack on a camp called Jabalia, which I first visited in 1980, long before anything called Hamas ever existed. I came home so filled with my pride in the nobility, dignity, steadfastness, and resistance of the Jabalia camp. I actually called my house Jabalia when I got home. Please don't carpet bomb it. An entirely innocent family live in it now and have no doubt changed its name. Then the Israelis occupied the Jabalia camp. I came upon, with a United Nations official driving me, I came upon on a later date, when I was a member of Parliament. I spoke about it in Parliament. You can check it. I came upon a group of Palestinian women in Jabalia camp being forced to clean the road with toothbrushes on their knees, being forced by heavily armed Israeli soldiers, Druze soldiers, border guards they were called, forcing a large group of women to sweep the road with toothbrushes. And suddenly, me, a British member of Parliament, and my colleague from the United Nations itself, I still remember him, looked like Anthony Quinn. We stood there, and the Israeli troops didn't give a damn that we were watching it. Anyway, it was the last straw. The double genocidal attack on a refugee camp in which now hundreds have been killed and hundreds maimed on a refugee camp. It was the last straw. If Israel does not cease fire by dawn on Friday, the world, my world, your world, our world will be on fire. At dawn on Friday, all kinds of people are going to join the war. And if the American aircraft carriers and warships and the British warships and the French and the Dutch, for God's sake, who knew the Dutch had a navy, Marines, who knew? If they join in defense of Netanyahu's apartheid state, then the world will be at war. From all parts of the West Asia, weapons in very, very large numbers, of very great potency, will set Israel on fire from north to south. They've got air raid shelters. I hope they get to them in time. But Israel will be on fire at dawn on Friday. If the United States and its satrapies then choose to join the war openly, they too will be at war with West Asia. Has the ring of 1984 about it, doesn't it? And the Straits of Hormuz will be closed. No oil will flow. No wheel will turn. A state of war between the United States and Iran will exist. And Iran has very powerful and determined friends. So, I'm sorry to be the bearer of that exceedingly bad news. With a bit of luck, we'll get a show in on Sunday, but no one can guarantee anything after that. It's the mother of all talk shows.